Hello, I am Dr. Lawrence Smith, Dean of the Donald and Barbara Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra Northwell. Thank you for tuning in to Well Said. In a culture of community, scholarship, and innovation, the Zucker School of Medicine is dedicated to transforming students into doctors who will improve healthcare, inspire change, and better the lives of the people they serve. It is why we are pleased to collaborate with WRHU Radio Hofstra University to bring you a program committed to sharing expert discussion and insight on health and wellness topics important to you. Join us today and each week for a recommended dose of Well Said with your host, Dr. Ira Nash.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ira Nash. Welcome to Well Said. Today, we'll be discussing the interplay between the microbiome, chronic inflammation, and aging. We've discussed the microbiome a few times on this show, most recently with our discussion on the infant microbiome. Today, we'll focus on the relationship between the microbiome and our immune system, and how these change with age and chronic disease, and how all of this can impact your health. My guest is my colleague, Dr. Joseph Cervia. Dr. Cervia is an infectious disease specialist and is board certified in both internal medicine and pediatrics. He's a clinical professor of medicine and pediatrics at the Zucker School of Medicine, and he's the senior medical director at Healthcare Partners, and I'm delighted he's with me today. Joe, welcome to Well Said.
Thank you for having me, Ira. It's my pleasure to be with you.
So, as an infectious disease specialist for both adults and children, I can only imagine, how have you been holding up through the extraordinary times that we've all been living through?
Well, thanks for asking that, Ira. As you might imagine, these past 2 years have been extremely challenging ones for those of us working in the field of infectious disease, as they have for society as a whole. Nevertheless, these challenges have also given us innumerable opportunities for learning, for growth. Pandemics have a way of doing that, of course, and of demonstrating to all of us that we really are just one global community living in a microbial world. Over the course of the past couple of years, those of us working in infectious disease and immunology have been asked to act as sort of guides in that microbial world. And just to provide with one perspective, humankind's been in existence for about 200,000 years, right? But bacteria have been around for about 3.5 billion. And while there are about 7 billion of us alive on Earth today, it's estimated there are about 5 nonillion, or 5 times 10 to the 30th bacteria on Earth. As evidence that we truly live in a microbial world, it's been estimated that microbial cells even outnumber our own human cells in our own bodies by a ratio of about 10 to 1, with over 1,000 different bacterial species in our gut alone.
Well, so that certainly changes one's perspective a little bit. You know, I mentioned that we've discussed the microbiome on the show a few times, and you alluded to this in your opening remarks as well, but I wonder if you would just define for us once again what we mean by the microbiome.
The microbiome is a term that we use to describe the specific collection of microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, viruses that exist in a particular environment. And the word's often used to describe the community of microorganisms that live in or on the human body, for example, in our gut or on our skin. The microbiome plays a fundamental role in the maturation, function, and the regulation of the host immune system from the time that we're born to the time we grow old.
So let's tease that apart a little bit. As I said at the beginning, we're going to discuss how the gut microbiome and the immune system interact as we age. But let's talk about these kind of separately first, and then see if we can have you explain how they interact. So first off, how does the gut microbiome change as we age?
Excellent question. So a healthy, diverse gut microbiome consists of different types of microorganisms, as I said before, bacteria, fungi, viruses, and they produce thousands of powerful compounds, and they coexist harmoniously in a habitat in our host gut. Aging, diet, lifestyle patterns make an impact on the bacteria in your gut. The gut microbiome is constantly undergoing dynamic changes through time as it integrates and responds to signals from the environment. Some of those signals may involve diet, antibiotic and other drug use, physical activity, and social environment. are among other factors that constantly shape the composition and function of the gut microbiome. Now, an imbalance in the microbial community structure, which is referred to as a dysbiosis, is a common accompaniment to age-related disorders that represent leading causes for disability and death worldwide. To cope with the constantly changing environment, the gut microbiome responds in a dynamic fashion, both through changes in the bacterial species composition in the microbiome and in its metabolic functions. So this process is fairly tightly regulated by the host immune system that figures as kind of an architect that shapes the gut microbiome by allowing certain commensal good bacteria, as it were, to thrive and to occupy niches within the gut, whereas selectively eliminating or neutralizing more harmful microbes. And as immune fitness progressively declines with age, surveillance of this dynamic host microbial interaction is impaired, and it results in wide-ranging functional consequences for host health and immunity. In humans, age-related dysbiosis, which has become known as microbe aging, is characterized by a loss of certain friendly bacteria like Clostridia and Bifidobacteria, and an enrichment in proteobacteria and overrepresentation of certain pathogenic or bad bacteria like the Enterobacteriaceae. And given that the intestine itself, the gut itself, is subject to significant age-related changes in tissue function and integrity in terms of its regenerative capacity, epithelial barrier maintenance and formation, mucus layer composition, and the movement of the gut, peristalsis, it's likely that changes in the gut mucosal niche also contribute to the dysbiotic state as we age. And these kind of subclinical changes in intestinal integrity can promote microbial extravasation. That is, some of the microbes get out of the intestine and go into the systemic circulation and create low-grade inflammation and create this kind of chronic inflammatory state and a predisposition to premature death.
What happens with our immune systems as we age? I mean, I think everybody recognizes that older people are more susceptible to infections. I mean, COVID has certainly reminded almost everybody of that. What's going on there? Why is it that we seem to become less immunocompetent as we age?
Biological age, be it of the immune system or other body tissues, is influenced by individuals' genetics, environment, as well as lifestyle. There's a term referred to as immunosenescence that was introduced decades ago to refer to the functional impairments and aberrant immune responses that are observed in older adults. These age-related changes in the quality and quantity of the immune responses lead to the progressive decline in the ability to trigger effective antibody and cellular responses to infections as well as to vaccinations. And this is exemplified by epidemiologic studies, as you mentioned, in older adults who have a higher risk for certain infections, as with the SARS coronavirus 2 and COVID-19, and as well as for autoimmune disorders, malignancies, and for premature death. Cellular and molecular features of immunosenescence have been described in both our innate and adaptive immune systems.
You know, I'm struck by the fact that we have a little bit of a kind of chicken and egg challenge here, because you were saying that the microbiome of the gut is affected by the immune system, but it also seems like it works the other way around.
Correct.
Meaning that changes in the gut affect the immune system. Is this aging or deterioration in the function of the immune system over time primarily something that's going on intrinsically in our immune system? Is it starting with changes in the microbiome, or am I barking up the wrong tree altogether?
No, I think those are excellent questions. And in fact, it is, as you perceived, it's a combination of both. The microbiome is constantly growing and evolving while the immune system is aging. And the dynamic interplay between the two is what drives this process that we refer to as immunosenescence. Some of the blood-derived cells of the immune system show the hallmarks of aging, including dysfunctional production of antibodies and as well as the antigen-presenting cells, natural killer cells, neutrophils that are so active in defending us against infection. And despite the fact that the immunology of aging has been intensively studied, there's still no strong consensus about the precise triggers of senescence within the immunity. Clearly, there's aging of the primary lymphoid organs like the bone marrow and the thymus, and there's chronic antigenic overload from chronic viral infections that linger on in our bodies, like, for example, cytomegalovirus. And any gut dysbiosis that occurs or inflammation are also proposed drivers of immunosenescence that together with the accumulation of genetic defects, cellular stress, and cell exhaustion cause the drop in immune fitness that is noticed as we age.
So let me just repeat what I think you just said, and you can tell me if I have this straight. We know that our immune response to infections, other kinds of challenges, declines as we age. We also know that there are changes in the composition and character of the gut microbiome as we age, and it's kind of not clear whether these are happening in parallel or one's driving the other.
Exactly. It's a bit of a chicken and egg phenomenon, as it were, Ira. Clearly, both have an effect on one another as we age. There's age-related alterations in the composition of the intestinal microbiota, and this occurs in other animal species as well. And here's where we learn a little bit more about the interaction between the immune system and the microbiome from animal models like in fruit flies and fish and in mice, because in these systems you can control for genetics, age, diet, and the microbiome itself in ways that we can't do in humans. And this kind of experimentation provides strong scientific evidence that there are certain intrinsic alterations in the microbial evolution that are sufficient to produce a dysbiotic state and to have an effect on immunity. For example, studies in some model organisms have shown that the gut microbiome has the potential to beneficially modulate aging in certain species, like in the fruit fly, for example. Studies with the fruit fly have demonstrated that intestinal dysbiosis not only precedes but also predicts the onset of age-related intestinal barrier dysfunction and systemic immune activation, as well as death.
When you were talking about these changes, these parallel changes in the gut microbiome and in our immune function, you mentioned a whole litany of chronic illnesses that go well beyond just not being able to respond to an infection. And I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit and talk about the interplay of the gut microbiome, this aging process that affects the microbiome and our immune system, and how that sets us up perhaps for chronic disease.
What we call inflammaging is the term for the immune system regulatory problems that occur with aging. And these result in excessive inflammation that's been associated with a number of chronic diseases. For example, type 2 diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, wherein there are certain pro-inflammatory cytokines that have been detected as having been produced in, for example, fatty tissue or adipose tissue. These pro-inflammatory cytokines are second messengers. They are chemicals that are produced by cells that promote inflammation. Examples of these are called IL-6, interleukin-6, TNF, tumor necrosis factor. There are certain things that doctors measure in blood to measure inflammation, like a substance called C-reactive protein. These are all elevated in obesity and the metabolic syndrome, as well as type 2 diabetes. And the production of these in adipose tissue can result in insulin resistance and a decrease in insulin production. With the production of what we refer to as type 2 diabetes, and some of the advanced glycation end products that accumulate in diabetes bring about some of the familiar complications that we've seen. For example, they accumulate in arteries, in the eyes, and the kidneys, resulting in eyesight problems and kidney problems. Some of these well-known complications related to diabetes. Also, in heart disease and atherosclerosis, there are certain autoantigens and infectious agents like chlamydia that sometimes accumulate in the cells of the coronary arteries in the intima, and these activate cells in the immune system, CD4 T cells, they're called, and they can secrete a pro-inflammatory substance, a cytokine known as interferon gamma. And this can result in intense inflammation and intimal plaque rupture that can result in heart attacks.
So I think what you're saying is with this sort of reduced function or dysfunction of the immune system, we're more prone to the release of these chemicals that rev up our own inflammatory response. Well, why don't you define what inflammation is, and then we can talk about the implications of that.
Well, inflammation is critical to our ability to fight pathogens, to mop up debris, and heal injuries. It's the process that our immune system goes through in order to do this, to fight invading organisms, to mop up afterwards, and to heal injuries. And as we age, there's a dynamic balance between pro- and anti-inflammatory networks that's needed. And as we get older, some of that balance declines, with the result in a complex interplay of genetic, environmental, and lifestyle factors that can contribute to both chronic infection as well as to excessive inflammation under some circumstances where inflammation is poorly controlled.
And that inflammation is controlled, at least in part, by those chemicals that you referred to as cytokines. As we age, the fine-tuned control of all this starts to get a little off track, which can lead to excessive production of these things, which in turn can lead to a whole host of chronic diseases that we associate with getting old in the modern world. You mentioned heart disease and diabetes.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's precisely correct. It's as though the thermostat breaks down a little bit. That thermostat that finally servo-regulates our inflammatory response and strikes a balance between protecting us in a microbial world and at the same time allowing us to go about our normal repair and growth functions without excessive trouble.
You mentioned that we live in a microbial world. I've certainly read that there's a whole school of thought that part of the reason why we're experiencing all of these inflammation-related diseases like diabetes and heart disease is because we're actually not exposed to the microbial world as much as humans used to be. Can you kind of explain what I just said and address whether you think that's true?
Yes, I think there is some truth to that. This has been variously referred to by as a hygiene hypothesis. We really do need to be exposed to the microbial world around us in order to allow our immune system to develop the level of sophistication that it requires in order to continue to adequately and accurately determine self from non-self and to protect us in a microbial environment, while at the same time allowing us to proceed without excessive damage related to an exuberant inflammatory response. And there's good evidence that there's some truth to that.
Why don't you share some of that evidence? I mean, I've read, for instance, that kids who grow up on a farm where they're more likely to encounter a wide variety of bacteria are, for instance, less likely to develop asthma.
Exactly right.
What are some other things that you can share that fall into that same sort of...
one of the famous problems that we've faced in recent couple of decades in particular are allergies that have been very problematic. And one food allergy that pops up very quickly that is discussed very frequently as well is peanut allergy. And there are some people who have extraordinary sensitivity to peanut. And it's been determined in good quality clinical trials that young children that are exposed to peanut very early in life, particularly children who come from high-risk backgrounds where they have family history of strong peanut allergy, tolerate peanuts a lot better when they're exposed early in life. So the immune system really needs to be able to be exposed to some of these foreign antigens, be they bacterial or part of the environment, foods and other environmental exposures, in order to fine-tune the response, to ensure that the response is the right one.
So for those of us who are too old to go back to childhood and disinclined to move to a farm, what can we do to ensure that we're doing what we can to maintain the health of our microbiome and the associated impact that it has on our immune system?
Given what we've discussed about the impact of the gut microbiome on the host immune system, it's reasonable to speculate that restoring the age-related declines in microbial richness of the gut microbiome, be it through personalized nutrition or supplements, may represent a good prophylactic measure to fight functional decline with immune fitness over time. And so, in this context, prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics have been tested in clinical settings.
Define what you mean by pre, pro, and postbiotics?
Sure. So probiotics are so-called good bacteria that are sometimes ingested in order to try to restore gut homeostasis, an attempt to recreate a healthy gut microbial environment. That's what a probiotic is. Prebiotic is a dietary substance that's poorly digested, like a fiber, that allows the probiotic or other gut microbes to grow. And postbiotics are just substances that are ordinarily produced by bacteria in the microbiome that may have a positive beneficial effect. And all of these have been tested in clinical settings. However, there's been a lack of consistency between studies. And as you might imagine, there are many different types of these substances that have been tested, and strain-specific differences and differences in doses, the nature and quantity of these substances, as well as the age and medical conditions of the subjects enrolled in the various studies, has made it difficult to really validate the effectiveness of these kinds of approaches to reinforce the kind of age-associated, prevent some of the age-associated declines in host immune fitness that we've been speaking about. Nonetheless, it's very appealing to think of this as an area of continued need for clinical study in order to potentially restore and sustain gut immunity. Meanwhile, other things that we can do, obviously, as you said, we can't turn back the hands of time, but as we work toward a better understanding of the dynamic age-related changes in the gut microbiome and the associated immunologic changes, there are a number of things we can do to try and support a healthy gut microbiome and immune system. And for example, we can eat a healthy diet and a balanced diet that's rich in fruits, vegetables, and fiber. We can aim to maintain a healthy body mass index and engage in regular physical activity. We can also avoid the unnecessary use of broad-spectrum antibiotics, good antimicrobial stewardship here. And we can receive age-appropriate recommended vaccinations that help us to enhance our immunity or recreate immunity against certain recognized microbial threats that are more common as we get older.
Well, that's a pretty good recipe for healthy living. Let me ask you about one thing in particular that you mentioned. It makes intuitive sense that what you eat is going to have an impact on what's going on in your gut, but less so, I think, for physical activity. What's the mechanism there?
It's really felt that the body works as a whole, that the immune system really doesn't work independently of the other organs and tissues and systems of the body. And in maintaining overall fitness, it's been amply well shown that physical activity really helps keep the body in shape as well as the mind. And the two are pivotal in maintaining health as we get older. In addition, being able to maintain a healthy body mass index through a combination of diet and exercise prevents some of the pro-inflammatory activity that's linked to visceral adiposity, for example, accumulation of excessive fat around the middle. That's been associated with metabolic syndrome, with diabetes, with heart disease, and even the risk of cancer.
Just to summarize then, a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, high in fiber, probably less so with refined foods, regular exercise, maintaining an ideal body weight. Those are things that people have probably heard over and over again, not just for immune function, but for all sorts of health promotion. And I guess what you're saying is a lot of that health promotion is actually mediated through gut health and immune health.
Exactly right. Yeah, the gut and the immunity and the immune system, the way that they interplay, clearly has an important effect on our overall health as we get older.
Just to go back to the pre and probiotic discussion for a moment, do you think we have enough evidence now to support the use of probiotics? I mean, I'm sure our listeners see these things heavily marketed in supermarkets and drugstores, on television. Is there anything out there that's of proven benefit?
I think that there's really conflicting evidence. There are lots of clinical trials that show marginal, if any, benefit with many of the commercially available products. And I think some of the hype has exceeded the quality of the evidence that's existing. Nevertheless, the majority of simple probiotic products like lactobacillus that can be purchased incidentally over the counter very inexpensively in most pharmacies have been shown to be at least harmless to most individuals, so safe for consumption.
Well, that's good.
And perhaps helpful in certain circumstances. And so, one could certainly consult one's doctor about it in their particular circumstances to determine whether it might be a good idea for them to try it. However, with respect to many of the commercial products, I would caution that the weight of evidence does not yet support many of them, and certainly one shouldn't empty their pocketbook to purchase many of these.
I'm glad that you recommended that our listeners talk to their individual physicians about their own particular circumstances. Are there any other resources that you would recommend to our listeners to get some more details about some of the fascinating things you've shared with us today?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as the past couple of years have clearly taught us, Ira, it may be sometimes difficult to sort out reliable evidence-based health information from that which may be somewhat less reliable. So for those who would like to learn more about this topic, I would suggest exploring the topic on websites such as that of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and the American Association for Retired Persons, AARP. And they tend to offer information which is more reliably evidence-based and up-to-date with peer-reviewed evidence.
Let's end it there. Joe, thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure being with you. Thanks for having me, Ira.
So my guest has been Dr. Joseph Cervia. He's an infectious disease specialist and board certified in both internal medicine and pediatrics, and he's a clinical professor of medicine and pediatrics at the Zucker School of Medicine. For more information about this program and to find our past episodes, please visit medicine.hofstra.edu/wellsaid. You can also subscribe to our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Our listeners are welcome to send comments, suggestions, and questions to wellsaid@hofstra.edu. Until next time, I'm Dr. Ira Nash, and that's Well Said.